His statement should have cut deep, but instead it gave me clarity. "We're doing you a favor," he sneered, leaning back in the chair as though the company I had built from the ground up was nothing more than his toy. His smugness spread like poison in that glass-walled office. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply leaned forward, placed a heavy folder on the table, and said with steady calm, "I appreciate that." Then I pushed the documents toward my attorney, who had been waiting quietly beside me. For a brief instant, the CEO's grin faltered before he covered it with a hollow laugh. But the following morning, when the court order reached his desk, when his eyes fell on the figure, $77.4 million, that laugh died in his throat. I had once admired him. I used to think of him as a mentor, the man who told me that business was built on loyalty. He spoke the words firmly the day I signed my first contract under his roof, shaking my hand with conviction. And I believe him, naively. Years of relentless work and sacrifice turned the company into something real, something enviable. I entrusted him with key decisions, inside knowledge, even my private doubts. He convinced me we were partners. But loyalty is a mask, and it began to crack. The first signs were subtle. A missing email chain, a deal closed without my knowledge, meetings I was suddenly excluded from. I brushed it aside at first, giving him the benefit of the doubt, until one late night, when the boardroom lights switched on. Through the glass, I saw him with two others, my competitors. They weren't discussing growth. They were carving up my company, planning my removal as if I were already irrelevant. That was a knife in my back, and he twisted it while smiling. I left the building silently that night, but inside, something hardened. There are two kinds of people after betrayal, those who lash out and those who calculate. I chose the second. I didn't storm into his office the next day. Instead, I shook his hand, thanked him for managing things while I focused on operations, and let him believe I was blind. Beneath that silence, I began preparing. I gathered evidence. Every diverted contract, every false expense filed under business development, every quiet deal with competitors. I followed the signatures, traced the paper trails he assumed were buried. I wasn't emotional. I was deliberate, sharpening my weapon like a hunter. First, I secured quiet allies, attorneys, auditors, and 2 board members he had dismissed as irrelevant. Next, I fed his arrogance. I let him think he was winning. When he said, "We're restructuring," I nodded. When he promised, "You'll be compensated," I smiled. All the while, the file of evidence grew thicker, sharper. And then came the turning point, a signed document transferring assets into a shell company tied directly to him. Carelessness born of greed. That was when I knew the end was inevitable. So when he sat across from me in that sterile office, smirking as he spat out, "We're doing you a favor," he had no idea he was already standing on the edge. My response, calm, measured, was a final push. "Thank you for that." The lawyer slid the folder forward. His eyes skimmed it, still smug. But smugness cannot withstand a court seal. The next morning, his voice cracked the phone line. "What is this? What is this court order for $77.4 million in damages?" I let him choke on it. "You once told me business was about loyalty." I said, "I agree. That's why I stayed loyal to the truth, to the law, to every person you thought you could exploit." His silence was louder than any curse. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It was about balance. He believed betrayal was strength. He mistook silence for weakness. He thought I wouldn't notice the knife pressed to my back. But I did. I didn't scream. I sharpened it, turned it, and handed it back. The $77.4 million wasn't vengeance. It was repayment. A receipt for every deception, every stolen deal, every late night wasted on faith in a man who never possessed the honor he preached. When I signed the final settlement, I felt no anger, no sorrow, only release. Because the greatest satisfaction wasn't watching him collapse. It was knowing he never saw me coming.